The primary shipyard of the stellar Concordat smelled of antiseptic and cold, pressurized gas. Envoy Kalen Vance stood on the observation deck, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the heavy plasma cutters slice through the hull of the SNS Valiant. It was the last of the Terran dreadnoughts. To the Concordat observers, it was a funeral. To Kalen, it was a necessary shedding of skin. He didn't flinch as the massive ion cannons were lowered into the scrap heap. He simply checked his chronometer and waited for the signature on the disarmament treaty to dry. The deadliest beast in the menagerie is the one that locks its own cage from the inside. 6 months later, Fleet Master Thorn sat in a darkened command module deep within the Oracle 9 industrial belt. He wasn't looking at weapon manifests. He was looking at blueprints for the Ceres-class ore haulers, bulky, ugly ships designed for nothing more than asteroid mining and long-haul transport. They were masterpieces of boredom. They were slow, their hulls were thick with reinforced lead shielding, and they possessed internal bays large enough to swallow a small moon. They stare at a plowshare and cannot fathom the sword hidden within its frame, Thorn thought, tapping a command on his console. On the surface of the ship, massive mechanical arms moved with rhythmic industrial precision. To a passing patrol, it looked like standard maintenance on a cargo crane. In reality, those arms were calibrated to sub-millimeter tolerances. Deep within the ore processing center of the ship, three-dimensional printers the size of houses sat idle, their reservoirs filled with high-density tungsten and reactive thermal paste. They weren't making mining drills. They were programmed to fabricate railgun slugs and missile casings in under 90 seconds. The Concordat had been very specific in their demands. No mounted weaponry. No military-grade targeting computers. No reinforced tactical shielding. Kalen Vance had smiled when he signed the papers. He had been the picture of a broken leader, a man accepting the sunset of his species' martial pride. But humans had spent their entire history turning everyday objects into instruments of survival. "We aren't breaking our shields. We are simply reshaping the metal," he had whispered to Thorn during their last secure transmission. The transition had been seamless. The shipyards didn't close, they just rebranded. The soldiers didn't retire. They became safety officers and logistics coordinators. The galaxy watched as humanity became a race of freighter pilots and merchants, seemingly content to haul the galaxy's trash and raw minerals for a pittance. The Concordat felt safe. They felt superior. They believed that by taking away the claw, they had tamed the tiger. Then came the Vorax. The Marauders didn't care about treaties or Concordat law. They saw Oracle 9 as a soft-targeted colony, protected only by 3 lumbering Terran haulers and a handful of orbital satellites. When the first Vorax scout ships dropped out of warp, their sensors registered 0 weapon signatures. The Marauder captain likely laughed as he signaled his fleet to move in for the harvest. Thorn watched the red icons multiply on his screen. His heart didn't race. It settled into a cold, mechanical rhythm. He looked at the massive fabrication bays, the silent printers, and the cranes that were currently locked in place. "Envoy Vance," Thorn said into the encrypted channel. "The forest is burning." "Then let the roots take hold, Master Thorn," Kalen replied from the capital. The Vorax fleet moved with the practiced arrogance of a predator entering an unguarded, high-fenced pasture. Their lead destroyer, a jagged shard of obsidian in spite, ignored the 3 Terran haulers, focusing instead on the atmospheric processors of Oracle 9. They expected panic. They expected frantic pleas for mercy over open frequencies. Instead, they got silence. Master Thorn felt the deck of the Ceres 11 vibrate as the ship's internal governors were overridden. "Initiate the sequence," he commanded, his voice a low rasp. "Burn the forest to ash, and you only clear the soil for deadlier roots to take hold." The transformation was violent and precise. On the outer hull, the bulky lead shielding designed to hide radiation signatures blew outward in a cloud of silver dust. From the massive ore processing bays, the 3-dimensional printers screamed to life, their nozzles spitting molten tungsten into preset magnetic molds. In less than 60 seconds, what had been a hollow cargo hold became a high-velocity ammunition factory. The industrial cranes, those clumsy mechanical arms the Concordat had deemed harmless, snapped into new configurations. Hydraulic locks engaged with the sound of a falling mountain. They weren't cranes anymore. They were the stabilizing rails for massive, improvised railguns. The Vorax captain realized the error only when the first hauler, the iron sower, rotated on its axis with a grace no freighter should possess. The ship didn't just fire. It exhaled a stream of hyper-accelerated metal that turned the lead Vorax scout into a cloud of expanding debris. Impact confirmed. A logistics coordinator, now a targeting officer, reported. There was no cheer, only the grim satisfaction of a plan coming together. On the other side of the system, the remaining two haulers bracketed the Vorax main line. They didn't have traditional shields. Instead, they vented ionized gas from their mining rigs, creating a thick artificial nebula that scrambled the Marauders' targeting sensors. Out of that mist, the Terran ships struck with the fury of a species that had spent centuries learning how to turn a hammer into a mace. The Vorax fleet broke. It wasn't a retreat. It was a slaughter. The Marauders tried to flee into warp, but the industrial gravitic anchors of the haulers meant for stabilizing asteroids clamped onto the enemy ships, dragging them back into the reach of the railguns. When the last Vorax signal winked out, a heavy, ringing silence returned to the bridge. Weeks later, the High Council of the Stellar Concordat sat in the same hall where Kalen Vance had surrendered his fleet. The holograms of the Oricon 9 engagement played on a loop, showing the terrifying speed of the human fabrication warships. The High Arbiter looked at Kalen, his voice trembling. "You violated the spirit of the treaty. You built hidden foundries. You turned civilian tools into weapons of mass destruction." Kalen leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "We followed every line of your law. We dismantled the ships you feared, but we didn't dismantle our nature. You told us we couldn't have a sword, so we made the plowshare the sharper blade." He stood up, adjusting his lapel. Outside the station windows, a dozen more Series-class haulers moved in a slow, rhythmic dance. They looked like harmless blocks of metal, but every diplomat in the room now saw them for what they truly were: a fleet that could recreate itself in the time it took to draw a breath. "Humanity accepts your revised proposal for unrestricted galactic rights," Kalen said, his voice echoing in the sudden, sharp quiet of the chamber. "It's better for everyone if the beast stays in the cage we built for ourselves." The Concordat conceded before the hour was out. Humanity didn't need a standing army. They were the factory, the weapon, and the soldier, all hidden in plain sight.